Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start with a question that, pretty much everyone asks at some point. If you're a professional, or maybe just starting out, you've definitely spent hours thinking about this one. What should I do with my life?
It's the big one, the all-consuming question.
It really is.
Yeah.
And on the surface, it feels like a good question to ask, right? It sounds responsible, like you're searching for purpose.
hmm
But the sources we've compiled for this deep dive, they point to something a little more corrosive hiding just beneath that question.
Right, because what we're often really asking is something else. It's more like, what path is going to fulfill me? What's going to make me feel secure or distinguished or, justify all the work it took to get here?
Exactly. That demand for self-justification.
That's the key. Our sources argue that this is the real dividing line between a life built around a modern career and one that's actually shaped by, well, a vocation.
So that's our mission today.
That's it. To really unpack that distinction, to look at vocation not as, a self-help program for self-actualization, but as a response to something outside of yourself.
Because if the starting question is wrong,
Then the answer, no matter how successful it looks on the outside, just leads to this restless, endless striving. You're never quite there.
okay, let's talk about that restlessness, because the sources, they describe this quiet confusion that I think a lot of very successful people feel.
Yeah.
They're competent, they're respected, they're hitting all their goals, but internally, they're unsettled. They have this feeling that, and this is a quote, something essential has been flattened.
And that's the result of a really slow cultural drift that's happened over decades.
Mm.
Our sources show how the idea of a calling has almost, imperceptibly become what they call a baptized version of ambition.
Self-actualization with some spiritual language sprinkled on top.
That's it, exactly. We've taken the entire logic of the market, find your niche, build your platform, sell your brand, and we've applied it to our deepest sense of who we are.
So for someone listening who is, doing well but feels that flattening, what are the real consequences of this mix-up?
Well, the stakes just become impossibly high. When your calling is your own personal project, failure isn't just a setback, it's devastating.
It feels like an indictment of your entire identity.
Right. It says, you chose wrong, so you are wrong. And on the flip side, success becomes this intoxicating drug.
Mhm.
It affirms that you're valuable, which means now you have to work twice as hard to keep proving it.
I see that. And that's why we shift from, say, obedience to a task to this constant need for optimization, isn't it?
Yes.
We stop asking, what am I supposed to be doing? And we start asking, how can I do the thing I chose more efficiently, more visibly, with bigger results?
Exactly. And just look at leadership burnout. It's everywhere. And it's not just from long hours. The sources call it the invisible weight of self-justification.
What do they mean by that?
It's this feeling that you're not just responsible for the project's success, but for proving that the whole endeavor is meaningful in the first place, that it's worth it. That's an existential burden nobody's built to carry.
That makes so much sense when you just listen to how we talk. We're so fluent in the language of trajectories and platforms and personal branding. That language, the language of achievement, it frames everything. Even our spiritual searching becomes a kind of career strategy with a halo on it.
But hang on, let's push back on that a bit. Ambition, optimization.
Yeah.
These are the things that build civilizations, right? We need people who want to build and climb.
A very fair point. So are the sources arguing that ambition itself is just wrong?
They make a really crucial distinction. Ambition is focused on what can I achieve. A calling, in this older original sense, is focused on what am I being asked to receive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the core shift. A calling isn't something you find by looking deeper inside yourself. It's something you receive by listening outward. It's not self-authored. It's initiated by something else.
And that's the radical reframe. We're moving away from writing our own story to, well, being written into one.
Precisely. And this takes us right to the sources. The Greek term for calling is klesis. It literally translates to a summons.
A summons.
A summons. And what's critical there is the emphasis. It's all on the authority of the caller, not the talent or the readiness of the person being summoned. A calling begins when an external voice breaks into your ordinary life.
So how does that idea, a summons, translate for someone who's, a purely secular professional? Is this concept only for people in a specific faith tradition?
That's a great question, and the sources don't shy away from it. The psychological parallel is really profound. Even in a secular sense, a summons-shaped life means you're attuned to external needs, not just internal desires.
Okay, so you're responding to what the world requires.
Exactly. The world needs a broken system fixed. It needs a quiet, faithful presence in a difficult place. It needs someone to do the unglamorous work. That need becomes the authoritative caller, whether it fits your 5-year plan or not.
And we see that pattern of interruption everywhere in the biblical examples they use. I mean, think of Abraham.
Right.
The call is all about departure before clarity. It's go from your country to a land that I will show you. He gets an order to move, not a business plan.
Not a feasibility study.
Not at all. And then there's Moses. He's out in the desert for decades, totally forgotten, just tending sheep. And then suddenly he's summoned from this place of deep reluctance.
He literally argues against it. I can't speak, send someone else.
Yeah.
God's summons had nothing to do with his readiness or his perceived skills. It was a commission that overrode his competence.
The New Testament examples are even more abrupt.
Yeah.
Jesus just walks up to these fishermen mending their nets. This is their livelihood.
Their whole world.
And he doesn't say, let's do a strengths assessment. He just says, follow me. And it interrupts everything with no promise of a salary or a clear path forward.
And if you connect that back to the listener, the point is this. A biblical calling isn't a ladder you climb for self-improvement. It's a summons to participate in God's work. It's about collaboration, not personal achievement. As Paul says, we are God's co-workers.
Which brings us right to the central conflict, doesn't it? The metrics are totally different. Our culture screams that calling equals passion, fulfillment, and, upward mobility.
If you're happy in climbing, you must be doing it right.
But the sources, they offer this really disruptive countermetric. They say the primary measure of faithfulness isn't satisfaction or fulfillment, it's obedience.
Yeah, that's a tough one for us to hear.
It really is. Obedience over fulfillment. I mean, doesn't that risk encouraging a kind of, dangerous compliance? How do you tell the difference between obeying an external call and just being exploited by a bad system?
That is the critical question. And it highlights the difference between an external call and a systemic demand. The obedience the sources talk about is tied to the authority of that original caller, the source of truth or need not the authority of your manager or the latest trend.
So it's a difference between a chosen path and a received path.
That's the language they use, yes.
Yeah.
A chosen path relies on your preferences and your strategy. A received path often disrupts all of that because it costs you your self-reliance. It forces you to give up control.
You see that cost so clearly in the examples. Mary's response to the Annunciation, she's given this terrifying, socially risky assignment.
Life-altering.
Totally. And she doesn't negotiate. She just says, let it be to me according to your word. It's this immediate trust in the caller, not in her own understanding of the circumstances.
She trusted the source more than her preference for a quiet, predictable life.
Right.
That is a received path.
Or the prophets. These weren't professional speakers. They were farmers, priests. Jeremiah says, I'm just a child. Amos insists he's no prophet by profession.
They're all arguing from a place of inadequacy. They're responding to a summons that contradicts their own self-perception, not applying for a job they think they'd be good at.
The sources have this one fascinating modern case study that really brings this home. A ministry leader who is at the absolute peak of his success.
Big book deal, lots of influence, everything was growing.
And he just stepped down. Not from burnout, not from scandal, but because he felt that obedience demanded it. The original call was complete, and a new, much smaller, much more hidden task was being asked of him.
Think about that. He had to walk away from the very things, the metrics, the influence that our world uses to define a successful life.
Because his faithfulness in that moment meant choosing a path that just couldn't be justified by the outcome.
And that really summarizes the whole thing. When your vocation is just a career, your obedience is conditional. You'll obey as long as it gets you ahead. A biblical calling asks for obedience, even if recognition and advancement are taken off the table completely.
Okay, so let's make this practical for you, the listener. If calling is a response, how do we actually practice this when the grammar of career is just screaming at us all day?
The sources suggest it starts with a very deliberate shift in your language, in your internal posture. It's about rewriting the script in your own head.
So instead of focusing on self-achievement, we focus on stewardship.
Exactly. You have to replace the words you use to measure your life.
So you replace advancement with
faithfulness.
You replace the metric of success
with obedience.
And this one is huge. You have to stop thinking of it as your platform and start thinking of it as your
stewardship, something you've been given to manage for a time, not something you own.
This language shift, it really gets at the idea of hidden obedience, doesn't it? Resisting that constant urge to narrate everything we do for an audience.
That might be the hardest part in our culture. Valuing consistency over visibility. Because the ultimate audience for a true response is just one.
But that's so tough. I mean, my quarterly review is literally tied to my visibility. It's hard to trust that the quiet work matters as much as the work that gets noticed.
Of course. And yet, this is the pattern we see in the sources over and over. Ruth, gleaning in a field, totally obscure. Joseph being faithful in a prison cell years before he was in the palace. The kingdom, they argue, advances through long obedience in the same direction, most of which is invisible.
And that's where the freedom is, in that responsive participation.
Absolutely. When you truly see yourself as a fellow worker, it frees you from two things that plague the career-driven life. First, pride, because the work isn't really yours to claim.
And second, despair.
And second, despair, because the results, which you can't control anyway, don't depend entirely on you. The pressure to manufacture your own purpose just falls away, and what's left is the freedom of simply offering a faithful response.
This really clarifies the core tension. The modern grammar of career tells us to build a life that impresses people,
To maximize your brand.
while the biblical grammar of calling invites us to live a life that responds, where integrity and humility define the work, regardless of the applause.
Which brings us back to the guiding question you can take away from this.
Yeah.
It's no longer that inward-looking question, what do I want to do with my life?
It becomes something much more demanding, but also, strangely, more liberating.
It becomes, what is God initiating, and how will I respond?
A final thought for you to consider from our deep dive today.
The career mindset demands that you have confidence in your own clarity, in your own 5-year plan. To live as the called is to live with confidence, not in your own clarity, but in the faithfulness of the caller.
So, where in your life are you striving to build and manufacture when you may just be called to respond? Think about that this week. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.